Hello and welcome to another episode of Foundation with Steve Teed. I am your host and servant, Steve Teed, asking you that one important question: what are you building your life on? The foundation of a person is essential for how they see the world, how they make moral decisions, and how they're going to answer those big questions in life. Now, part of building a foundation in your own life and part of the job as we grow up is to pass on that foundation, to help develop the foundation, the worldview of the next coming generation. And on this episode, that's all what we're going to talk about. So as we get into the episode, I say we're going to go, let me cut back on the music, and I'll tell you what it's all going to be about. So we're going to be talking, as I said, building on the foundation. Now, there is a proverb in the scriptures, Proverbs 16:22, that it says this: train a child in the way they should go, and when they're older, they will not depart from it. Now, is that an absolute truth? Well, no, the Proverbs themselves in the scriptures aren't absolute truths. In fact, you got to know when to apply it. In fact, in Proverbs, you get two proverbs back to back. One says, do not answer a fool in his folly, lest you join him in that folly. And the other one right next to it says, answer a fool in his folly so you can correct him. So wisdom is knowing when to apply these things. But the idea of training a child in the way they should go and they'll not depart from it, it is very much a reality. Now, it's not absolute. Now, what do I mean by that? You could have a child who grows up completely in a Christian household with a Christian worldview, a Christian foundation, and then they decide to turn away from it. You see that quite a bit by one experience in their life, be it, and that changes everything. And the same is true of the opposite, where somebody grows up in a very much nihilistic worldview or a hedonistic worldview or naturalistic worldview. I'll define those much later. And turn around and end up with a theistic one or a Christian worldview based on experience, things like that. But in the generalization, children, when they are educated, when they are trained, they will continue to view that world through that foundation and through that worldview. Now, obviously, when I use the word foundation, foundation is equivalent to worldview. The way that we see the world, the way that we interact with the world, that kind of thing. That's what it's all about. And so in this episode, we're going to be asking, what kind of foundation are we passing on to the next generation? Because our foundation or our worldview is affected by absolutely everything that we see. It's affected by our experiences, by our family life, by our educational life. It's affected by the media. It's affected by the movies we watch. It's affected by the music we listen to. This is why we have to be so careful in what we watch, what we experience, and what we put in front of us. And we have to understand that everything that's being built nowadays is being done for a particular reason, to pass on a philosophical view, to pass on a worldview, a foundation to people, and particularly to the next generation. If you're wondering what has happened to our culture, what has happened to our society, it is not something that just came out of the blue. It is something that has developed over the years. It is something that developed because of our education system, because of what they've watched, because of what they've been taught. And so what is happening is the generation that's after mine, my generation was the first to start to experience this, but the generation that is coming up behind me is also very much, they're influenced by all of this worldview that's around them, and the foundation that they have been built upon, that their life is being built on and being taught, is one that is horrible. And so in this episode, we're going to be looking at that foundation. What foundation is being passed on to our children? So we're going to look at a couple of news articles. We're going to look at a couple of examples from school systems. And the most likely, after the break, we're going to talk about building a proper foundation. How do we build a proper foundation in the lives of the next generation? So we're going to be going to a news article. As always, I like to start with the news article. We got to pull on the music. There's our news article. I'm going to be turning over first to Disney. I'm going to go over to Disney. Now, the Disney article that we're going to be following here is called, they call their fellow employees bigots. Conservatives at Disney issue open statement detailing hostile work environment. Let me read that again because I messed that all up. They call their fellow employees bigots. Conservatives at Disney issue open statement detailing hostile work environment. Now you may be going, okay, why am I going with that? If I'm talking about the worldview, if I'm going to be talking about building a foundation in the next generation, why is it that I'm turning to an article about Disney employees? Well, here's why. Whether we like to accept it or not, Disney has been a kind of a staple in many families for a long time. We've trusted Disney to produce some good, wholesome entertainments, some better than others. But we are, even in my own growing up, I remember I used to watch a Disney movie over and over again. And I could ask you, what's your favorite Disney movie? And I could ask, like, what do you consider the best Disney movie? But the movie that I watched growing up over and over again, a Disney movie, I admit this, was 101 Dalmatians. I love that movie. I don't know why. I just love that movie. I watched it over and over and over again, even to the point that growing up, I had a couple of Dalmatian stuffed animals that I had on my bed from the movie series. I absolutely love that movie. That's the one. That was my favorite. But what one do I consider the best? I gotta be honest. My opinion, so you can write in, you can tell me what it is, you can let me know in the comments, whatever, what your favorite Disney movie was, or what you think the best Disney movie is. I tend to think The Lion King was. I think it's got a great story, the music actually fits it, so I go with Lion King. But the reason being is Disney is such a large part of everything. When you think about movie franchises that have sold so much money, you think about the Marvel franchise, which is now Disney. Star Wars has gone Disney. Disney is such a huge empire. And then everybody, they attend Disney, and people, like, where are you going? Well, I'm going to Disneyland. I've never been. I don't have any desire to go. But I know people who, they're in love with it. They want to go, and they want to pass that love on to their kids. And Disney itself has such an influence on the next generation, whether we want to accept it or not. Why? Because we sit kids in front of it and we're like, hey, let's watch a movie. And I do watch movies with my kids. My kids like the Cars movie. Cars 1 is the best of the three. They've also watched Mater's Tall Tales. So they enjoy watching Cars movies. We watch like Ratatouille. Generally, you can tell we tend to stick to Pixar. But you pass it on to the next generation. And so when a company like Disney does something, it is going to affect and it's going to be pushing a value system. So, and up until the last little while, Disney has remained pretty much neutral on all these issues, but that has changed. That has really changed. And what has sparked this all off, and this is a reality, you have to understand, what has sparked this all off is Florida's bill. And Florida passed a bill just recently. It's called the Parental Rights in Education Bill. That's what it's actually called. But you've probably also heard the title, if you've been aware of various circles, of what's called the Don't Say Gay Bill. But it's actually called the Parental Rights in Education. And it's caused a kickback a little bit. And there's a reason for it. And I'm going to tell you, I'm all in favor of the Parental Rights in Education Bill. I really am. The Parental Rights in Education says you are not allowed to talk about sexual education, gender ideology, transgender, or anything to kids. You're not allowed to teach it to kids from kindergarten to grade 3. That's what it's about. And I am in favor of that. I really am. But Disney has been being called to speak out. I'm going to pull up the article here. Here it is. Here's the whole article. You can see the title there. They call their fellow employees bigots, the same title I read. But let's look at a little bit of the article. As LGBT employees at Disney get ready to stage a walkout on March 22nd over Disney's attempt to remain neutral on Florida's Parental Rights in Education Bill, conservative staffers have issued an open letter of their own. It was published Monday and provided to the Daily Wire in advance. The authors reveal that they do not feel safe in their jobs and say Disney has come to be an increasingly uncomfortable place to work for those of us whose political and religious views are not explicitly progressive. The staffers say they've watched silently as Disney villainizes and condemns political leaders who share their opinions. So, and here's a portion of the actual letter. You can, if you go to this article from the Daily Wire, you can find the whole letter at the bottom of it. It's been fully provided. But here's part of the letter. Over the last few weeks, we have watched as our leadership has expressed their condemnation for laws and policies we support. Talking again about the parental rights in education as one of them. It says, we have watched as our colleagues convinced that no one in the company could possibly disagree with them, grow increasingly aggressive in their demands. They insist that TWDC, the Walt Disney Company, take a strong stance on not only the issue but other legislation and openly advocate for the punishment of employees who disagree with them. Left-leaning cast members are free to promote their agenda and organize on company time using company resources. They call their fellow employees bigots and pressured TWDC to use corporate influence to further their left-wing legislative goals. And so that was part of the letter. Here's the continuing of the article. Rather than demanding the company issue statements on proposed laws under its influence to pressure legislators, the conservative staffers behind the letter, who published anonymously out of fear of retaliation, are instead asking the company to stay out of politics. Now, I don't think that's such a bad thing. I think most companies should stay out of politics. In fact, this is what you see. One of the statements about the church, and people push this, and this may exist in the States, but it doesn't really exist in Canada, but it is in the Baptist circles, a Baptist distinctive called the separation of church and state. Now, the problem is it's been completely backwards. It's been moved completely backwards. The idea of the original article of the United States, separation of church and state, and the same thing of the Baptist distinctives, and there is something similar in Canada, but it's different, is that the state should not make any law enforcing or imposing any kind of religious views and should have no influence on the church. And that kind of that's what the really separation was. And so what you see is when the church wants to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, they're being told, you stay out of this. Don't you support this separation of church and state? Get out of it. Yet here we see companies being encouraged to take a stand, to be encouraged to push against legislation, to encourage to put forth an agenda. That's really the problem. And that's where it is. So the conservatives at Disney, conservative players, are not urging Disney to say support the bill or whatnot, or support any of these things, but rather stay neutral. Stay out of it. But of course, our culture can't do this because their idea is if you stay silent, that's violence. That's you're agreeing with that. This is where you see things like a statement like, it's not enough for you not to be racist. You have to be anti-racist. In other words, it's not enough for you to be okay with LGBTQ. You have to be vocally in support of LGBTQ. That's kind of the idea here. It's not enough for you not to really care about transgender legislation, and it's not enough for you to just leave them alone and let them be them. You have to be in support of it. You got to speak out it. That's the problem that's going on here. But I want to continue here with the article. Let's continue back to the article. Citing Hamilton and The Mandalorian as unifying content, they argue that Disney is more valuable as a business and a cultural institution when audiences from across the political spectrum feel free to enjoy the entertainment it produces. They are inviting the public to join them in asking the company to stay politically neutral. I would agree with that. I absolutely would. I got to tell you, I don't watch any of the new movies. I watched all of the Marvel movies. I don't know what you call them. They call them in phases. What is it, up to phase 3? I really don't know. I watched until the end of the Avengers saga. Let's put it that way. The original. And then they started adding other movies. And as they've added other movies, there you can see an ideology influencing the movies and that kind of thing. And this is why you had movies such as Ghostbusters Answer the Call. They gave it its own title, I guess. Ocean's 8 and what's the other? The new Charlie's Angels. All those movies did absolutely horrible because they put political agenda ahead of good entertainment. Now, I watched the Ghostbusters one because I'm like, how was it? But I got to tell you, it's not as good as the originals. I thought it could have been better, but they pushed too many things. They were worried about too many things. And political agendas will always hurt. So I agree. Call them out on it. But okay, let's continue. One of the employees who works in the Imagineering department designing attractions in the Disney theme park told the Daily Wire that there have been 3 close colleagues leave his division in the last 9 months because the increasingly hostile work environment. No matter what department or what segment we've been watching, the diverse, equity, and inclusion takeover of Disney accelerated to breakneck speed. And God help you if you get caught standing in front of the train. In other words, if you get caught being against it. This is another engineer describing the open letter as a kind of last-ditch effort to appeal to senior leadership that may agree with us but lack of the courage to say anything because they feel alone themselves. So it is kind of helping. This is some senior leadership is listening. It says, one high-level studio executive who spoke to the Daily Wire on the condition of anonymity, now there's a problem there, look how they're afraid to even speak up, said they too were concerned that the company is damaging its brand by abandoning the political neutrality that many hoped the more conservative Bob Chapek who would usher in when he replaced Bob Iger as CEO. But then you find out that he started that way, but then he came down too. It says, I jumped the article a little bit. Chapek to reverse course. They caused him to reverse course in a move the exec says was motivated by cowardice and stupidity. It says now they're not going to leave him alone. They will not stop. So he really has two choices. Just castrate himself or to stand up for him. Now that's kind of harsh language, but you get what they're saying there. So the executive also revealed that Disney C-suite is aware of polling done by the Daily Wire to show that 64% of Americans and 68% of parents support the parental rights and education bill. They also know that a plurality of people say Disney's stance against it will make them less likely to buy Disney products. But the exec says they are more afraid of the employees than they are afraid of the customers. So that's kind of where it's going. Now, why do I say that's important to look at? Why did I spend that time talking about Disney, in essence, going really left-leaning as Disney itself? That obviously it's talking probably more likely about the theme park itself, just based on how that's worded and things like that. But it's happening in their movies. And I talked about this. In our last episode, I talked about the fact that LGBTQ characters are growing in media, and it's being pushed. And it's appearing in movies. It's appearing in kids' movies. One of the examples that I like to show, my kids, I admit, my kids like to watch the Despicable Me. They like Gru, they like the Minions, that kind of thing. And so we decided to sit down and watch the Minions movie. And there was a spot, I think her name is Scarlet Overkill. And you have this person a man dressed as Scarlet Overkill. And now, that in itself, you're like, okay, they're just an absolute big fanatic, whatever. And you can kind of overlook that, but it's definitely visible. But it's in the middle of Scarlet Overkill's, and somebody will tell me if I got that name. I know it's Scarlet, I'm just not sure, remember if it's Overkill. But she's in the middle of her speech, and it reads kind of like I'll say a woman's lib speech. In that idea, it's like, they said that a woman couldn't be a villain, they said a woman couldn't win Villain of the Year, that kind of thing. And in this speech, in the middle of that, she turns around and she goes, well, times they are a-changin'. And now when she says that, the only character that you can really see in the background directly behind her is this guy dressed up in full Scarlet outfit. In other words, a guy who's dressed in drag. So it's almost, whether you like it or not, that is an appeal, that isn't a push for such things to make you accept these things. This is why you saw when Disney redid Beauty and the Beast, they decided to make an LGBTQ character. This is why you saw in the Avengers Endgame. Now, it's slight, but when Steve, Captain America, is holding a session, you have a homosexual character. This is why in the next section of the Marvels, you have conversations, I think, of making Captain Marvel bisexual, bringing in a transgender character. This is what is happening, and it's influencing it all. And since we normally said that Disney was great for kids, and it's wholesome, it's entertaining, and that kind of thing, the agenda is being pushed that it's pushing a foundation onto our kids. This is what is happening. We need to be able to be aware of this. What foundation are we passing on to our children? Because it's one that is definitely counter-scriptural, counter-biblical, counter against Christianity. I'm going to leave the Disney article, but that's just the Disney one. But we're not done talking about this. We're going to go right on to our next one. That's where we're going to go. All right, our next one, we're going to go. This one's going to be to a school. I'm going to do two school ones here, because school is an important aspect in the life of children. And you say, well, how could it really be that much? You got to think, okay? Now, I've got two kids of school age. I've got a third one on the way to school age. It's already born. He'll be 3 here in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, I don't have another child on the way. My wife would be like, what's going on here? Coming into school age. Now, I've got one in Christian school. We make sacrifices for that to be. But I've got one in public school just because he needs certain help that's not available in the private sector. Why? Because the government will say, hey, no, we're gonna allow that in the private school. You want that, you got to pay for yourself. And unfortunately, we're not in a position to afford that. So I'm very aware of what is going on in public school. But I drop that child off now. I drop him off at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I pick him up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So he's there. If you want to do your math, look at that. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3. He is in that environment for 7 hours a day. 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. You do the math. That's 35 hours a week. He is in a system that I'm not there. We do our best to be involved. We do our best to be engaged. But our children, for the most part, they're in a system about 30 to 35, maybe even 40 hours a week. They're in a system where they're being trained, they're being educated, and they're being pressed. And we have, sometimes it's funny when you pick the child up. What'd you learn? Nothing. You didn't do anything today? No, I didn't do nothing. Well, they have. They have done things. How do I know? Well, nice thing is about the nature of my middle child, who's in the public system. He repeats everything. He copies everything. He really does. If he goes to school, then we'll find out what they're doing very quickly because he'll repair it, and that's a good thing on our part. But a lot of parents don't have that luxury. Because of the way we have to work and things like that. Many parents, they put their kids on the school bus and then they don't see their kid again until they get home from work, maybe 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night. But I wanted to show you what's happening in some school systems here. So we're going to go to the first article, again, for the Daily Wire. This article, blatant disregard for parental rights. A school district is telling teachers to hide students' gender transitions from parents. Now, you've seen an article similar to this before if you've been with me in this show, a foundation. But I want to look at this article a little bit. It says last week, so this one came out March 21st. Last week, Daily Wire investigator Mayor Elliott uncovered a startling admission from a Wisconsin school district. She joined the Daily Wire's Morning Wire podcast in an exclusive interview to discuss the school district's push to hide students' gender transition from parents. The Eau Claire Area School District in western Wisconsin held a training session for their staff in February, and a slide from a presentation during the training told teachers that parents are not entitled to know their kids' identities. Excuse me, I'm the parent, not the system. So this is what they want. They want the state to own your children. They want you to know that the children belong to the state, not you. So hide it from it. The slide was first observed by conservative watchdog group Empower in Wisconsin and then reviewed by Eldori for the Daily Wire. Eldori revealed to the Morning Wire host John Bickley and Georgia Howe that the directive of Eau Claire Area School District was also told teachers that knowledge of children's gender identities must be earned by parents. She commented. The training went on to say that teachers are often straddling this complex situation and said that the district's priority is supporting the student. Asked if the training session angered parents of the children at Eau Claire schools, Eldora explained that parents, along with 3 school board candidates, have voiced their frustration with the district. The school board candidates who were attempting to unseat current members actually released a joint statement accusing the district of a, quote, blatant disregard for parental rights and responsibilities, Eldora explained. They also said the policy directly pressures teachers to break what they call this known social contract between schools and parents. What's the known contract? What's the social contract? The social contract is, hey, teachers, parents should be your support in the classroom. They should be. That the teachers and the parents should be working hand in hand in the education of the students. But they're breaking that. They're hiding it from the parents. This is the problem. She went on to report that the school board candidates believe that the district is stirring up division between parents and teachers. I agree. They also said it's sending the message that schools are in control of the children rather than parents and families, she said. I agree with that. That is purposely the point. The Eau Claire's Area School District is standing by their training, however. Asked how they can defend such a position, Eldora explained that the Eau Claire's District Superintendent, Michael Johnson, released a statement that primarily chalked it up to the need for equality and inclusion. Johnson focused on LGBTQ students struggling with mental health and social isolation as reasons for keeping their gender transition secret from parents. Basically, kids feel comfortable talking about gender identities with teachers, but less so with parents, Eldori said, summing up the district's argument. I'll read a little bit more. The school district president, Tim Nolan, also backed the presentation statement, saying that students might not feel safe to be their true self at home, so that's why they should be able to turn to staff at school, they said. Now, I got one question. Elementary school students coming up. They're growing up. Where are they learning such things as gender identity, LGBTQ, transgenderism? Where are they learning this? They're learning it at school in the name of inclusion. And I told my wife when I hear the word inclusion, it's not, I don't think good thoughts. I don't think what it is. But I guarantee you that if you try to complain about inclusion, they're gonna pull a Mott and Bailey fallacy. That's the argument where you have a really strong and defensible place, and then you've got a weak one. And every time the weak one's challenged, they run back to the strong. I said, if you challenge this idea of inclusivity, they would say, okay, well, are you against having autistic kids in the classroom? Are you against having Down syndrome kids in the classroom? Are you against having kids with learning disabilities in the classroom? It's like, well, because that's what you're talking about. You're talking about you're against inclusivity, and that's not true. What I am against, and what I have a hard time with, and this is being pushed, because I've seen it even with my when my child was in grade 2, it was pushed, an LGBTQ agenda. When a school celebrates and pushes their kids in this kind of ideology, this is building a foundation that is contrary to probably what most parents want. It's being pushed. How does a kid even know about such things as sexuality? How does a child who is 9 years old understand that, hey, I'm attracted to boys sexually as a boy, or I'm a girl attracted to girls sexually? How does a 9-year-old even think about that? Generally, we don't even have these thoughts unless they've been pushed on us, unless they've been taught to us. And unless it's been that way, we don't. If a child is left to its natural development, they're not even going to think about things such as sexuality or gender roles or gender identity until they start to hit puberty. That is really what's going to happen. Any other time, it's about what the parents teach. It's about they're being taught. Sometimes it's the parents teaching it, and a lot of times it's the school teaching it. And if you think that parents and schools are on the same grounds, I'm going to show you another article here briefly, just about some guidance counselors in a school. Now, this particular situation came from Oregon school, because the Oregon school district, Oregon school, they banned Pride and BLM flags. Now, that's not really what they banned. I'm going to jump down the article a little bit. The actual thing that they banned here is the superintendent, Morlock, says district lawyers are advising the board that it will be difficult to determine what is or is not political, quasi-political, or controversial under this policy. So that's really what they're arguing about. So what's the actual rule of the school district? The Newburgh School District Board has adopted official policy to ban political, quasi-political, or controversial topics in school. So, in other words, it issued a ban that the teachers were not allowed to teach their political views, their ideology, their personal ideology onto kids. Because believe it or not, I've seen enough TikTok videos, I've seen enough of this being pushed. There was a school in Texas. Now, I'm not going to show you this because I could show you it, but it's really not that important. But it's an elementary school, and the reason I'm not showing you this is because for our listening audience, there really is nothing to hear, except just people walking around. It was an elementary school that had the kids of the school march through the school hallways in what they classified as a pride march. Yeah, that's what was going on. But then there's the guidance counselors. This Oregon school, the guidance counselors, let me pull it up here. Now, I'm not going to show you the video simply because I'll probably get hit with a copyright strike because there's music in it. But it says, after an Oregon school banned Pride and BLM flags because they're being classified as political and quasi-political controversial, these two middle school counselors responded with this TikTok video. They've since been placed on leave. Now, I'm not going to play the video, as I said. But here's the description of it a little bit. Two Oregon middle school guidance counselors apparently infuriated that the school district banned LGBT pride and Black Lives Matters flags in the classroom posted a TikTok video in which they danced around while flashing their middle fingers, mouthing the FU song. Mouthing FU. It's what's it called? The FU song or something like that. Again, I'm not going to play it. Why? Because if I played that video that you see there, you would see two female guidance counselors. Keep this. These are the ones who are direct kids when they have issues, that when they suffer issues of abuse, or they're suffering bullying, or they're suffering some questions of gender or sexuality. These are the ones they're going to. They're coming and saying, "Hey, F you." It's like A, B, C, D. I think however the song goes. Then F you, and then it's like F your mom, F your job. Like that's what they're saying. And why is and their real response it's partly to that legislation, as the libs of TikTok there have said, but it was really more due to the fact that a parent said, "Hey, that flag shouldn't be allowed." Because why? Because it is controversial. It's pushing an agenda. That's what it is. See, this is what's being pushed on our kids. If you've joined me in earlier episodes, I've shown time and time again where our school system is trying to develop a bad foundation. So the question that I'm going to ask is, what are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? This is what's being taught. You want to know why our country is the way it is, why our culture is the way it is? It's because too long we've trusted the foundation building of the next generation to a school system and to a political system. And now we're reaping the effects of it, and it's not good. Train a child in the way they should go, and when they're older, they'll not depart from it. I'd like to say this is always a positive thing. This isn't. This is also a negative thing. It really is, and this is what's happening. So we're gonna take a break. We're gonna take a break right there, and after the break, we're gonna come back after the break, and we're gonna look at how to build a proper foundation. That's what we're gonna look at. And what is the benefit of the proper foundation? Because we have a scriptural mandate to build the proper foundation in our children, to stop leaving it to the hands of a political system or an educational system. I think it's time that the parents stand up and say, "I am going to train my children." And will it come at a cost? Yes. But we say, "I will willingly bear that cost for my children." So join me and come on back after the break, and as we continue with Foundation with Steve T, training a child, building the foundation in the next generation.
Sing unto the Lord a new song. Let his praises fill the temple. For he is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. Bow down before him. Sing unto the Lord a new song, for he loves to hear our praises. Let all of creation sing glory to our God. Bow down before him. Hallelujah. Glory to God. Hallelujah. Glory to God. Majesty. Worship his majesty. Unto Jesus be a glory, honor, and praise. Majesty, kingdom, authority, flow from his throne high the name of Jesus. Magnify, come glorify Christ Jesus the King. Majesty, worship his majesty. Jesus who died, now glorify, King of all kings. Jesus who died, now glorify, King of all kings. Oh Lord, you're beautiful. Your face is all I see. And when your eyes are on this child, your grace abounds to me. Let me touch him. Let me touch Jesus. Let me touch him as he passes by, so that I may reach out to others. They shall know him, they shall live and never die. But to thee his hand extended, reaching out to thee, oh press. Let me touch him, let me touch Jesus, oh Lord, so that others may know and be blessed. Because I want to be more like you, and Jesus, and I want to be more like you. Ooh, I want to be a vessel you work through. I want to be more like you.
All right, I want to welcome you back here as we're continuing on in our episode today, Building the Foundation in the Next Generation. So we looked at some school system, we looked at how they're building a foundation, even through Disney, through the media and things like that. But now in this segment here, we're going to be looking at kind of some tips, some advice. How are we to build a foundation in the next generation? Let's pull back the music here. All right, where are we going in this one? Normally in this segment, I admit, we look at a video of a teaching or an article on some kind of teaching, and then we try to extrapolate a little bit, helping us to see how the true foundation of Jesus Christ is the one that answers those questions best, and how those false teachings really don't. But this is going to be a little bit different. This one, as I said, we're looking at building a foundation in the next generation. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he's older, he'll not depart from it. As we saw before the break, our school systems, our media, our entertainment, everything that we experience is trying to build a foundation in everybody, particularly in our children. And I've shown over previous episodes how cartoons, how just shows that they would watch that are designed for elementary kids, that are designed for preschool kids, are designing and trying to develop within them a worldview that they find acceptable. but in the end really doesn't work. And in this segment, I'm talking as much to myself here as anybody else. I really am. I'm talking to myself. I'm a father of 3 boys, a leader of a household that God has given me. I'm a leader of a congregation of people that I disciple. And I teach a variety of ages. I'm teaching young kids, I'm teaching middle kids, I'm teaching older kids, I'm teaching adults and into the senior years. And it's all about discipleship. And so even in the last little bit, I'm teaching of the older kids, the middle school and the high school and a little bit over, teaching and asking them about worldview. And our last lesson was on worldviews. What kind of worldviews are there? Because our school system and our educational system, our entertainment system, it's all teaching a worldview. And many of them aren't even realizing what the worldview really is. So there are some that are very, very popular. The one worldview that is very popular today, and you would say, no, it's not there, until I explain it, and you're going to see, actually, that is what's being taught. It's the Marxist worldview, Marxism. Now, if you're not familiar with Marxism, your probably initial reaction is, well, that's bad. But what is it? Obviously, it was popularized by Karl Marx, but it was really an economic system, is really what it was, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and the class struggle between the two. What we have today, and what's being taught today, is not the economic Marxism. What's being taught is what you can classify as cultural Marxism. You say, well, what does that look like? And what does that mean? And trust me, talking with the youth about this not too long ago, and they're explaining what they're learning in school, what they're learning in their studies, and that kind of thing. They were talking, it was cultural Marxism. And when I explained it to them, I said, here's what it is. Marxism is a system of conflict. That's really what it's all about. Now, what does that look like economically? Well, that's where you get the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. But now we're into a different form of Marxism. We're in the cultural Marxism. So the conflict here will be best exhibited through what's called critical theory, or what you'd classify as critical race theory. And in critical theory and cultural Marxism, one of the major issues of this is the fact that it says that it denies, we'll say, individual responsibility. It denies it in favor of a system. That the system is to blame. The system is the problem. So therefore, that system has to be destroyed. The system has to be taken down. And how are you seeing this play out? Well, this is why you see such things as Black Lives Matter and defund the police. It's cultural Marxism. That the system is a problem. Where you say it's systemic racism. There's systemic racism in the police force. There's systemic racism in our government system. There's systemic racism in the school system. There's systemic racism within the church. So it's not individuals anymore. It's not that the individual is racist, it's the system is racist. And so if the system is fixed, well, then racism will disappear. That's kind of the idea. That's critical race theory. And so what have they done? They've exchanged the proletariat and the bourgeoisie for races. In this case, white race against non-white race. Kind of making it broad there, but that's kind of the way it is. And so the white race, the white system, is the abusive one, is the corrupt system that needs to be brought down. And this is being taught to our kids. You say, well, they're not really getting this. I'm telling you, I guarantee you they are. And in fact, a lot of times, and I've done this when I picked up my eldest son from school, you ask him, what did you learn in school today? And he'll say, nothing. Now, he's in a Christian school. And you say, well, that's just a typical kid. Well, actually, sometimes when you ask them, what they learn, nothing. And I remember even being older, and they asked me, well, what did you learn from this? I'm gonna be honest, I can't tell you anything I really learned. I'm sure I learned something, and I'm sure it'll show up in application in life, but I can't tell you exactly what I've learned. But I've learned something. Why? Because they're learning worldviews. Every time you send your kid to a public system, and public system is generally more to blame. Now, I'm not saying every teacher in the public system is bad. In fact, my middle child had a really excellent teacher in grade 2. I would praise her. I'd celebrate her. I'm glad my nephew has her this year. I really do. She was great to work with. She was a believer, even in a non-believing system. And I know that there are Christians working in the public system. But there are plenty of not. And I showed you that before the break, where guidance counselors were upset, where in Florida they had to pass the Public Rights of Education bill. It's sad that they had to pass something like this. Why? Because our children are being groomed in this. So the cultural Marxism is a worldview that our kids are learning. What are they also learning in worldviews? And I talked about this with the youth as well. they're learning things such as nihilism. You know what? Nothing matters. Nothing really matters. If nothing really matters, there's no such thing as right and wrong. There's no such thing as purpose or meaning. So let's just do whatever we want. Then you get kind of the worldview that Disney will teach you. It is not so much Marxism, but what will they teach? They'll teach romanticism. Now, don't confuse that with being a romantic. Romanticism is a follow-up or a reaction to the Enlightenment era, where in the Enlightenment era everything was like plot out, hands touched on, what you can see, touch, scientific era, kind of that thing. Romanticism is this idea, you go ahead and do whatever you like. Do what you want. Do what you desire. That's what romanticism is. Work on follow your heart. See, this is why I said Disney teaches this. Just do what you think is right. Don't worry about the consequences now. Do what's right in the moment. And you'd be influenced this when you hear people say, well, that sounds like a future me problem. That's the idea of romanticism. Then you get the idea of naturalism. And the whole idea is like this world is all that we have, so we got to take care of it. So only things that we can see is real. The trees, the rocks, that kind of thing. Only that is real. Now, if you look at that idea of naturalism, you'll obviously end up in nihilism, which means it doesn't really matter. So, and you say, well, how can that be? Well, let's ask really the question. If this world is all we have, and so what difference does it make if it ends 100 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 1,000 years, or 1,000,000 years from now? Eventually it's going to end, and then nothing. It's not going to matter, is it? That's nihilism. So ultimately, all these worldviews are going to end up back in nihilism. It doesn't really have a purpose. But our kids are being trained in this. As I said, they're going to public school, believe it or not, for like 7 hours a day at sometimes longer. They're being groomed in this system. They're being pushed into this worldview. And I think what has happened, to the shame of parents, is that we've kind of pulled back. And so we need to help develop in the worldview. And it is the responsibility of the parents to do this. I'm going to turn to the Word of God here, because obviously I'm a strong proponent, and I'm pushing, and I hope to develop within us a Christian worldview. And I don't mean a Christian worldview that some are promoting. I'm talking about a biblical worldview that is built on the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this should be taught to the next generation. But let me go to some scripture here. Let's go first. Deuteronomy chapter 6, 4-9. This is a quintessential passage for the Israelites. And again, I'm going to be going through a few passages here. Deuteronomy 6, 4-9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Okay? There is one Lord, one God. So what about him? Okay, here's the commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your might. Sorry, I was quoting the New Testament kind of version of that. With all your soul, with all your might. Now here you go. And all these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Okay, you say, well, that's the individual. That's the parent. That's the father, really. You shall teach them diligently to your children. How would you do this? How would you go about teaching them diligently? How can I teach the children? One of my things my eldest son has asked me. He's got a test coming up, and he's a little worried about it. He's made known he's worried about that test. He wants to do well on it. It's actually a First Nations test. So about what are the nations, what are the First Nations, things like that. He's nervous about it. He's like, Dad, how do I study? How do I study? So it's a good question. How do I teach this? How would I teach this diligently to my children? How can I teach them diligently the law of God? Well, you shall talk about them when you sit in your house. What are you doing at the table? What are you doing when you're sitting in the living room? You should talk about them. When you walk, by the way, you go for a walk. I encourage everyone to go for a walk. Good exercise. In other words, as you travel, as you're traveling about, what do you have on in the car? What do you have playing? That kind of thing. So you're talking about walking the way. When you lie down and when you rise up. What it says, you shall also bind them as signs in your house, on your hand. You shall put them as frontlet between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. What do we have up on the wall? What pictures do we have on the wall? Do we have posters on the wall? What is our clothing wearing? Are our kids seeing this? Are they being so ingrained in it that it becomes part of who they are? Because I guarantee you, whether you like it or not, our school systems are ingraining them in it. They've got it before their eyes constantly. LGBTQ characters in every movie that they watch, every kid show that they watch, pride flags everywhere they go, in the classroom, in the city hall, the school's flying it. But are they seeing the Christian? Are they being surrounded by the law and the commandment of God? This is the duty of the parents, building the next foundation. That's Deuteronomy 6:4. Let's go to the next one. Deuteronomy 11:18. You shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, so at the center of your being. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and you shall as frontlets between your eyes, as a constant reminder. So the parents themselves need the reminder. You shall teach them to your children. Talking of them when you are sitting in your house, when you're walking by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. So a repeat, same book, Deuteronomy. It was so important for the Israelites to know this, to know the law of God, that they should instruct it. So important that they were told multiple times that they should educate their children. We need this. Let's go on. I'm going to jump a little bit. Psalm 78. Psalm 78, a maskil of Asaph. Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parable. That just means story. I will utter dark sayings of old, things that we have heard and known, that our fathers have told to us. So this is passed on, generation to generation. Things that are true, passed on. Look what it says. We will not hide them from our children, but we will tell them to the coming generation. What are we going to tell? The glorious deeds of the Lord, and his might, and the wonders which he has done. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to teach them. You see, the biggest mistake that we can make is saying, you know what, I send my kids to church. And I'm going to be honest with you. Not a lot of parents are doing this anymore. They're really not. They're not sending their kids to church. You know, they say, oh, I'll send my kids to Sunday school. However you want to call it, Sunday school itself, it seems to be almost a thing of the past. But sending kids to church, a lot of parents don't do this. But even those that do, I got to tell you, I run 3 kids programs throughout the week. We run on Sunday. We run one here on Sunday, the Kingdom Kids program, which is taught. That one runs during our morning service. The kids are with us for worship, and then they get a lesson that they can understand, and I teach the adults. I got a great team that heads that up, and they do wonderful work. They do great work. Tuesday nights, kids ages 3 to 11. They're dropped off at the church, ages 3 to grade 5. They're dropped off Tuesday night. They get an hour. They get a solid hour of songs, and we teach Bible songs. We teach them the scriptures. We teach them the stories. They're learning about Christ. They're learning about Him, and then we play a game, or we do a craft that reinforces the lesson. That's 1 hour a week. And then I run the 2 youth groups, and for both those youth groups, they're getting a good half hour to 45 minutes of lesson. But let me put a comparison here. Do you really think that a 1 hour or 1.5 hour is a week isn't any comparison to the 35 hours a week that they're being exposed to in the public system? And I'm not even counting movies, television, or any of that. Do we really think that sending them to church, do we really think that just attending a service once a week, maybe 2 times a week, maybe pick it up, is that enough to combat the worldview that for our children of the world? Do we really think that that's enough? This is why the education, I think, should be pointed back towards the church, back towards the parents in the household, to building that foundation. So who really should do it? Let me give you one here. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. Fathers, instruction directly to fathers. And I've talked on the past the importance of fathers in the household and why it's so important to have that 2-parent household, God's design. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Whose job, and this may be a scathing to us a little bit, but whose job is it to teach the children? It's the parents. Parents, it is your job. It is my job as a parent to teach the next generation the instructions of the Lord. Look, our schools are no longer stuck teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. What are they doing? They're teaching ideologies. They're teaching a worldview. They're more concerned about building a foundation that they classify as inclusive and acceptable than they are teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic rather than teaching academics. This is why you've got kids coming out of school who don't really know how to read, who don't know how to write cursive or write a letter. This is why they don't know how to do taxes, because the schools are more concerned with teaching an ideology, to teaching the value system of the state, than they are concerned with teaching academics. This is why they've pulled back from the parents. This is why they've developed almost a closed system, that a parent has to research, a parent has to push for it, to say, what are you teaching my child? What are you really teaching them? Not just academically. What are you exposing them to? That's what you have to ask. Because they're not being exposed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. No. They're not being given a theistic worldview, a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview. They're being given a cultural worldview, or a Marxist worldview, or a naturalist worldview. That's what they're doing. That is direct contrast to the scriptures. See, when we're not raising our children up in a biblical worldview, then is it any wonder that they're going the other way? Let me give you some absolute some facts here of a worldview, a biblical worldview. If we want our children to grow up to love the Lord, and that, we need to train them in a biblical worldview. And what are the effects of this? Let me give you some effects here. People with a Christian worldview, they're 11 times less likely to condone adultery, to ending a marriage and going with other. They are 15 times less likely to believe homosexuality is acceptable. Why is that? Why should that be a surprise? Because our school system, throughout the Word of God, is telling them that everything is okay, and they're being ingrained into this. They're 18 times less likely to condone drunkenness. They're less likely to condone drunkenness. Let me go to the next one. People with a Christian worldview, they're 31 times less likely to condone premarital cohabitation. And they're 100 times less likely to endorse abortion. Now you may go, hold on a second, wait, hold on a second. I know people who go to church. They go every week. And yet they're accepting of homosexuality, that they see no problem with cohabitation, that they see no problem with divorce and remarriage. You say, I see these. So why is it? Well, I would argue that they don't have a biblical worldview. They've developed a worldview that's faulty. They developed a worldview that's not very good. You see, why is it? And I told the kids, why is it that you think that the generation coming up after us is suffering from anxiety, depression, suicide at a greater rate? Is it because the society doesn't accept them? Because that's what the LGBTQ agenda would tell you. That it's saying, that the reason that the suicide rate is because, those evil Christians, those evil conservatives, they're abusing them. They just don't accept them. No, that's not what's going on. What is really going on is the worldview that they're teaching them is either the romanticized worldview, the natural worldview, and both of those ultimately lead to the nihilistic worldview, that nothing matters. That nothing matters. You see, that's really what it comes down to. Is it a surprise when you say, hey, follow your heart and everything will turn out well, and when it doesn't, they run into an existential crisis? Is that a wonder? They're not being taught a biblical worldview. They're being taught this romanticized worldview, or the natural worldview, and at worst, the Marxist worldview, the cultural Marxist worldview. And in the end, that says, well, there is no purpose. There is no purpose. There is no meaning. There is no right and wrong. There is nothing. You really don't. You're really not valued in the grand scheme of things. You say, well, not what, because you came from nothing. You're a gigantic cosmic accident, and therefore, when you die, that's it. So what's the purpose of life? And you can say, well, it's to pass on genetic code. To what end? There's no end to it. Is it any wonder then? And then the lesson that they're getting, that there is no God, there is no creator, that there is nothing. And so when they see these disasters happening, earthquakes, hurricanes, what are they being told? They're being told that the earth is beyond recognition. The earth's going to be destroyed in 10 years. So you got a 6-year-old who's being told that they're going to be dead by the time they're 16. Is that going to bring in fear and anxiety? Well, of course it is. You're telling a 12-year-old that you're probably never going to get married and have kids. Why? Because it's over. And that's it. You die, you're done. Look, this is what they're being taught. And you say, well, I don't remember that being in the curriculum of the school systems. I don't remember that being in the Disney movies. I don't remember that being in the media. But when they've taken God out of the picture, what do you expect? You see, when we have God, we have the biblical worldview. And you say, why, in a biblical worldview, why is it that you would hold against these things? Why? Because in a biblical worldview, the first thing you get taught is that God created all things. And if we were created for a purpose. Our kids need to hear this. They do. That you have a purpose. That you're not an accident. That you're not just some cosmic accident. That you matter. Isn't that amazing? It's a lesson that has to be learned. That we've got to tell them. Why? Because ultimately, you're being told in the school system you don't matter. Look at it. And why do you think many of our youth are falling for the trap that the society is laying out? Why? Because they're told you really don't matter unless you're part of one of these protected classes, the LGBTQ class, whatever. So is it any wonder that they're coming out that way? Because then they're getting cheered, they're getting celebrated, they're getting rejoiced? Well, yeah, they are. But the scripture has the answer. You matter. You're created to God. Why would they be against homosexuality? Because they understand in the beginning of the biblical worldview, God created them male and female. Talked about this last episode. In the last episode was called what causes the cracks, and then what is the result of that? But training our children. We need to discipline our children in the worldview of the scriptures. We really do. But I think what it comes down to, and this is the real challenge of this. This is one where I'm going to really give a challenge. Sometimes it's just all about helping the worldview. I'm giving a challenge to ourselves here. I really am. Are we willing to count the cost of being a true follower of Jesus Christ? When we look at the command, what is the command that we are given? The Great Commission. Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, and therefore I give it to you to go forth and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them all that I've commanded you. Are we doing this in our home? Are we doing this in our home? Are we able to say that I'm really doing this? But you know what? I think we run into a problem. I want to bring up another scripture verse. This one seems a little odd, but this one... sorry, over here, Mark 8, 34-38, and this is all about the cost of being a disciple. This is, and calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation. The generation that Jesus was in was adulterous and sinful. I wonder how much greater ours is. It says, of him the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father and with his holy angels. Look at that first line. If anyone comes up to me, he's got to deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now, I read somebody else. They tried to redefine that and say that's taking up the cross of Jesus. But that's not what it means. It means lay down their life for the sake of the gospel. See, I think we've lived in our culture for so long that we think everything's about us. Everything is great, that if we follow God, we're always going to be victorious in this world, that we're going to walk out of the fiery furnace like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're going to walk out of the lion's den like Daniel did. That we're going to walk away from all these troubles. We're going to have victory over every enemy, but that's not the case. When I look at the example of the disciples, they died martyr's death, and even John, who died of old age, in the end, at the end of it, he was exiled. The Apostle Paul was murdered, executed by the Romans. You read the end of Hebrews chapter 11, it talks about they were sawn in two, boiled in oil. They didn't shy away from the flames. They counted the cost of being a disciple. Now, sometimes we think that's just being a ridicule, facing hardship, and just some negative feedback from the people around us. That's part of it. But I wonder, how far are we willing to go to train our next generation? How far are we willing to go to make sure our kids are trained not in the worldview of this world, in Marxism and Romanticism, nihilism, naturalism, but rather being trained in the worldview of Christ? into the actual biblical worldview. Because I think one of the problems we do like nice things. We like cars. We like the phones. We like the gadgets. We like the computers. We like the systems. We do. But are we willing to forgo these niceties to train our children? To do the option, you know what? It's like maybe I'm gonna homeschool. Maybe that's not an option for us. Maybe it's, you know what? I'm definitely gonna be looking into the Christian private school, not just private schools. Private schools can themselves be off, but look at a good Christian private school, because we need a biblical worldview. Like our children are struggling. That can't be denied. Suicide, teen suicide on the rise, teen depression on the rise, teen anxiety on the rise. Why are all these things on the rise? I lay it squarely at the feet of the fact that they're being taught a worldview that has no meaning, that has no purpose, that the foundation of their life is so inadequate that when troubles come and difficulties come, they just fall apart. When you look at it, it's kind of funny, but when you walk up now and find people who prescribe to the transgenderism and ask them just to define a simple question, answer a simple question, and this one made newsworthy just because of the new justice there in the States and the question that was asked, and they couldn't answer it. It's just a simple question: what is a woman? They can't answer it because they've got no grounds which to make the answer. They got no grounds on which to base their answer on. They really can't, because the foundation that they have, it's a Marxist foundation where you got to tear down the system. That includes the system of God-given sexes and genders, and God-given gender roles. They've got to tear that down. Now, that's not saying a female can't be a justice, but it means there are certain roles for male and female. And they got to tear this all down so they can't answer it. Is it any wonder when it's like, what is it? Well, I don't know anymore. If the leading lawmakers of the country can't even define what a gender is, what a sex is, what a woman is, what hope does the next generation have? Do you know what can define it? The scriptures, a biblical worldview. It tells us a woman of God. It tells us what a woman of God looks like. It tells us how a woman of God is to behave. It tells us how a wife should be. It tells us it tells us what a man of God looks like. One of the funny scriptures in there, quit ye like man, or stand up, be a man. It tells us what being a man looks like. And it's got nothing to do with the stereotype that the world has made of man that they turn around and call toxic masculinity. It has to do with doing it God's way. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Men, stand up, take care of the children, train your children. You're going to find in the scriptures that a lot of times it's the man's job to teach the children the word of God, to teach them and help them develop on a biblical worldview. But are we doing this? Will we count the cost and say, you know what? I'm going to be more concerned that my kids are growing up and following the Lord Jesus Christ than anything else. One of the sad things that I heard recently, and it's not out of context, but you don't really get an answer. It's from Elevation Church, Stephen Furtick. He was just kind of doing a talk on things like this, and he was talking about his own son and the music in. Now, I don't know Stephen Furtick. I don't know his son. I don't even know the whole situation with his son. But I remember listening to this part of his message and the whole section of it, and he was talking about working out with his son, and that's a good thing. I do that it's really fun. I go for a walk with my oldest son. My middle son likes to come out and work out. I'm getting a little older, so I do physically work out a little bit. Metabolism slowing down, things like that. And I put on a few pounds before, and I wanted to lose them. So I enjoy spending time with. That's a good thing. It is. You're alone with them. You got time with them. You can talk about things. That's why I talk to my children. And so he talks about he says he puts on he talks about the classic rock and roll, the 100 greatest rock and roll bands. Now, don't ask me anything about that. I don't know anything about rock and roll, but that's not the statement that got me. Is when he said, it's like, he just makes like this offhanded comment. I don't know if it was a joke or what. And he's like, you may not want to decide, you may not decide to be a follower of Jesus Christ, but you're definitely going to know the top rock bands. I'm like, wait a minute. There's your problem. There's your problem. We need to teach our children. what's more important, that he can identify the greatest guitarist in rock history, or if they can understand and know who Jesus Christ is and put their faith in him. Because I guarantee you, when our children stand before God, and it's going to happen, the scriptures make it clear, a day is coming that everyone will stand before God. The equivalence of getting in the entrance exam for getting to heaven is not going to be, hey, can you name 50 of the top greatest rock bands of all time, which would be subjective. Or rather, it's going to be, what did you do with Jesus? Is your name written in this Lamb's Book of Life or not? Our kids are growing up in a very struggling generation, a wicked, evil, adulterous generation. And we should be helping them to develop a foundation. There's a saying that says, if we don't teach our children to follow Jesus Christ, the world's definitely going to teach them not to. And that's what we're seeing. The world is trying to put them on a foundation that is faulty, that is failing, and in the end will only bring death. We need to build our lives on the proper foundation of Jesus Christ. And we need to train the next generation on that same foundation. It is the foundation that has stood the test of time. It has withstood the test of time. It's withstood every accusation against it. It's withstood every challenge, historical, scientifically. It has stood the challenge of it all. And it is the only worldview that answers those questions of life. Where did we come from? What is my purpose? What is my value? The question of evil, and answers what happens when I die. The biblical worldview is the only worldview that answers those questions satisfactorily and will actually bring hope and joy to the future, even in the midst of the fallen world. Isn't this what we want our life to be built on? And isn't this what we want the foundation of our children's lives also to be built upon? Don't allow Disney, don't allow the education system, don't allow the music system, don't allow our entertainment world to form the foundation of the life of our children. May we stand up as parents and as our generation and say, I will build the foundation of my children's life also on the gospel of Jesus Christ. That way, when those challenges come, when failures happen, when the world brings its attacks, they will stand firm. And on the day when Jesus comes back, he will look upon them and say, come, my child, into your inheritance, because they've put their faith in Jesus. All right, we're going to stop there. So I thank you again for joining me. If you have any questions or anything you want to talk to me, you want to send me a message, go right ahead, send me a message, pastorstephenteed@gmail.com. Send me a message. I'd love to respond to you. If you watch this, you can write it in the comments on YouTube or Rumble. Write it there. I'd love to talk to you, and we can talk about it. But until next time, I pray that the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and give you his peace. And may you walk forever and build on the solid foundation of our Lord Jesus Christ. Until next time.